I'm now going to put the belt onto the X-rail. And to do this, I'm just going to take the rail off again. Just put that to the side. And we've got this lovely assembly here, which we're just going to take apart. Take this top panel off. This is a mounting plate for your extruder. There's still one more component to go in there, and that's a magnet to go into this little hole here. But we'll do that when we've got the extruder in place. Okay, so we've got that apart. So I'm also going to take these thrust bearings off, and I'll just get my shifter. Because now that we've finished this rail, we can actually set the carriage in place permanently. I'm just going to position this on here, and we just want to wind these in evenly, these two screws. Now on these rails are slightly more slender than some of the other rails that I've had, so I've had to swap out these two 16mm button heads for two 20mm button heads. They just squeeze this part in, or squeeze these two bearings in a little bit further. So that's feeling really good now. There's no wobble on that at all, which is fantastic, but it still runs really smoothly. That's great. And sometimes when you do these screws up, or these nuts up, that actually shifts a little bit. It gets a bit tighter, just because it changes the angle of the bearing. Let's just see what's happened there. Yeah, that's just slightly too tight. So I'm just going to wind that back a half turn, and that one back a half turn, and undo these. Let that slide again. There's a little bit of play in there, but let's just see when I tighten up whether that disappears. Yep. So now these need to be done up quite tight. We don't want them to come undone again. So that's really smooth. That's lovely. So we don't ever need to touch those again. That slides off really nice and easily and slots back onto the rail. That's great. Now we can put our thrust bearings back on the back side. Just fix these in place. Just get my socket. And we just want these to be done up tight enough to hold these bearings without wobbling, without any play in them, but not so tight that it stops the free running of the part. So that's way too loose. Let's just try that. It's probably just a little bit too tight. Do that. Just an eighth of a turn. There's no real wobble there. That one could do with just going a little bit tighter. Ah, beautiful. That's great. Alright, so now that that's done, we can put this part back in the rail, or in the assembly. Just flip these little toggles around and do that up. This one doesn't seem to want to go. There we go. And do that one up. Just careful not to break this. You'll see it just flexing a little bit in there. Okay, so we can get to these quite easily, so I'm just going to run that one through there. Now, it's actually running it teeth side down. Towards the bearing. Pop that in there. And slide this one down here, and you can see that just coming through the other side. Just pull that through. And this has to run over or around. It's quite difficult to show this on video, but it needs to go across here, around this bearing on the right hand side, down around the drive gear, back up around this tensioning bearing, down underneath on this bearing here, up to this bearing and back through onto your carriage. Now, actually, it might still be easier to do this without that rail on. I'm just going to take that off again, actually, so we can see what's happening a little bit better in here and get our fingers in there a bit better. So I'm just going to pass this back up through here. Like this, and that's gripped. So now you can see in here it's actually running over that bearing. We've just got to miss these two little spaces in here. We don't want the belt to foul on those. So now, importantly, the belt needs to run underneath this little V bracket. So you can see here there's a bit of a gap underneath it. Run that underneath there. You can see this other bearing here runs underneath there, so I'm just going to pull that all the way through for the moment. Like this. Now it needs to run back up. I don't know if you can see that. Back up through here, like this. So it's run over this bearing here. And then back in through here on this bearing. So now that should run freely if I grab those, which it does do. Now we can put this back in. Now it's important to put it in the right way as well. So these rounded ends need to point away from the motor. Just pull those belts out of the way. Push that down in there. Do that up again. Very gentle. It runs beautifully freely. Now to hold this in here, I've got these two tiny little components there. I don't know if you can see these, but they've got some tiny teeth in them. So if I see if I can focus, oh, nearly, there we go. You can see those tiny teeth in. Now they fit in the grooves or the teeth of the belt, and you can see one has a tooth on the edge and the other has a space on the edge. The space will go towards the end of the belt, like this. So space that side, tooth this side, end of the belt, and we're going to super glue that right on the end there. So that's why I've got some Loctite here. I really like this Loctite 401. I think it glues pretty much everything together. So I'll get that out of the way. And I'm just going to put a dob in the last two, between the last two teeth. There we go. And then grab this little part. See if that focuses in. Grab that little part, and if you can see that, grab that and just push it quite hard, making sure you don't stick your fingers to it. I'm just going to clear off the excess there. Now that should look something like that. Looks something like that. So now that we've got one, there's a little slot. Let's see if I can get the light on this. There's a little slot there. This one fits in that slot, and we can pull that tight, like this. Now this is an important aspect of this. A couple of important things. We're going to cut this belt down to size. But once you've cut, obviously, you can't go back, so we just need to make sure that everything is in its right place. So I'm just going to make sure that it's running properly over all of the bearings, and it's not sitting on any of the washers to the side of the bearings, and it's not sitting off to the side of the bearing, so that if it's off to the side of the bearing, then we'll cut it too short. So these are all sitting on the bearings quite nicely. I'm just going to hold that there. The other important thing to note is that this screw needs to be at the minimum of its travel, so it slides backwards like this to tension the belt. So you can see when I pull that back, it really tensions that belt. So we want it to be pushed all the way that way. And I'm just going to pull that tight here. Now, this is pretty much the right length about here. Now, if I had my Sharpie, that's better. So my mark is there, and I'm going to go 2 teeth further than the mark, which is there. So I've just got a little bit of overlap there. I'm going to take this other little part, and again, the gap. So I've got a tooth on this side now, and a gap on this side, and I want the tooth to be set backwards, and the little gap to go to that leading edge. So it sits like that. It's just so we capture 2 teeth on the belt. I'm just going to super glue this in place. Doesn't matter if you put super glue on the belt or the the little catch. Just put that on there, give it a squeeze. It's pretty much an instantaneous fix. Sticking my fingers together, and I'll just wipe off some of the excess and plug this into the hole. Now, fingers crossed it goes. Sometimes they're a bit of a tight fit. It's best that it is quite a tight fit, and that is absolutely perfect. And now you'll see when I pull this tensioner back, it pulls everything nice and tight. And this means that we can just disassemble the axis really, really easily, that these just slot out and slot back in really seamlessly. So now I'm going to take this screw and just tighten it up a bit till it just catches. That's pretty good. Get that so that it's quite tight, and then tighten this up. Again, not over tightening it. Now that's not quite tight enough. It's kind of loosened itself when I tightened it. Pull that back. Sounds like one of the parts just seated itself a little bit better. I don't think that was a bad crack. I think that was an okay crack. Just check the part to make sure our important bits aren't broken. Check that that still rolls freely, which is great. These are reasonably tight, and we can turn that motor, which then makes the carriage move. It's fantastic. Last thing to do is to put this top plate back on. And I might actually just put a little daub of the PVC primer. So this spacer, it's a bit of a pain in the bum. Just going to pop that in there. Put a bit of PVC primer in there. Wipe off the excess and pop that in place. The surface tension should hold it in place for now. Just means when we pull this off, the top plate off again next time, that won't fall off. Just going to fix all of these down.